And I actually think it'll become negligent for organizations not to listen to what's being said in the social space from their consumers. And so those companies that are able to look to the future of what the business models need to look like and start building those now, I think, like what we've been discussing here, I think, to your point, are going to have a competitive advantage.
And to that point, I mean, you can go on and tweet to JetBlue and you get an immediate response. You can interact with Pepsi products and you can get an immediate response. There's going to be a growing expectation amongst consumers that whatever products they're buying or dealing with, that they're going to have that kind of level of customer service, that level of interest, that level of support from companies that make and sell products. And yes, there is always going to be that learned intermediary that's going to be performing some function in the healthcare space. But nonetheless, there is that growing expectation amongst consumers and people that there is going to be some kind of support from the companies that are making products that make probably the most significant impact on their lives. And that we as an industry need to recognize that and to start to make those changes within how we structure ourselves to be able to support their needs from that perspective.
But I want to tie in something that Meredith said, because it really, it's interesting in the context of what you said, is that there's underlying economics that are occurring in this industry that are going to force this, whether people realize it or not. So a blockbuster model of drugs really lended itself to a single message, and you could literally do Super Bowl ads. In the new world, which I think Meredith very nicely described, where we either have very focused or very specific diseases, you're going to have a different type, you're going to have a different approach. Your alternative is to leverage social media to create a constituency and to create a meaningful relationship with these patients. So it's less the blockbuster drug and it's more the Ben and Jerry's or Apple type feel with the consumer. And you're seeing organizations who don't have the sort of the legacy, if you will, that they're able to then jump into that in a much more powerful way. But it's going to happen.
Well, it demands a reallocation of resources. It demands putting money and resources behind it to make that possible.
Or pulling resources away from existing commitments, and I think that's a challenge.
That's a hard thing to do.
Well, I also think it means that you have to give up a level of control that I think the industry is accustomed to having over their communications and looking at a partnering model that's different from the way they've partnered with media outlets in the past. Whether that's partnering with other independent organizations that can speak with honesty and without the regulatory oversight to this engaged consumer group, or whether it's developing entirely different content that hasn't existed before. I think these are strategies that have to be considered.
Just one more topic, and then I think we'll go ahead and open it up to media. I think historically that conduit between the pharmaceutical company and the physician was that sales rep and that sales rep call. And I was just wondering, Daniel, if you had any thoughts about how digital technologies is really changing the relationships that companies are building with physicians themselves.
I'll make a brief comment, and then I really do want to hear Meredith's thoughts on it, because she actually has the data for this. But part of it is being driven by the economics. We just can't support the conventional approach of having the reps going out to the physicians, but also part of it is the expectations. Like Marc said, in a world where people want to tweet JetBlue, the idea that I have to consume information when it's convenient for the manufacturer and not for me, it's just looked at as almost passé. That's some of the things you were touching on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the physician's world and the physician's mindset we hear again and again is completely oriented around efficiency, getting their questions answered during the day, and just being able to get through the day and be able to treat their patients. And a sales rep coming in with 3 points and a close is not very well suited to those demands of today's physicians. And so I think what the smart companies are thinking about is how do I actually engage with physicians who are going through their workday and Googling, in many cases, to find the answer to their question. When you're putting all of your answers behind a password-protected door that you have to enter your ME number to access, that's not very well suited to this Google mentality that many physicians have. So really starting to open up and find ways to provide physicians with the answers they need when they need them and service that they need when they're there with the patient, I think will be critical. So.
That's great. Well, I'd like to go ahead and just sort of shift our focus a little bit over to the questions that we've been getting from media, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Jennifer Paganelli, Senior Media Strategist, who's going to field those questions and offer them to our Digital Advisory Board.
Hi everyone, I want to make sure that you can hear me. I'm going to now encourage you all to ask questions via your the box showing up. Just please type in your question. We have a lot of them, so if you could be patient with us, we're going to try to give all the reporters an opportunity to ask a question. If we do not have time, I want to remind you all to, you know how to contact myself, Mandy, and Kathleen, and we can set up additional interviews following the session if there's additional questions we can't get to now. So I thank you all in advance for your patience. The first question we're going to take. Okay. Stand by, we're just reading them. First question we're going to take is coming from, actually I'm going to stand up more closer to the microphone. Stand by. First question we're going to take is from Ben Comer. Ben is from Pharmaceutical Executive. His question is about doctors and digital. Are doctors using the product portals some pharma companies have created for patient education materials, financial assistance programs, et cetera, and ordering samples? He's heard some of these products portals have been described as, million-dollar ghost towns, and he's wondering if there's a better way that companies can provide materials and services to physicians. How is POZEN, communicating with docs digitally? What's the plan there? And Daniel, maybe I'll throw it to you first to answer that question.
I think the question of manufacturers either building communities or brand.com, my experience with this has been 100% failure rate. I'm yet to see a single one that actually succeeds. I think it's two challenges. One is, how do you drive the traffic? And the second is, if a physician were to go out and find this information, for better or worse, the location that they're least likely to trust it from is the manufacturer. And so, again, the smarter organizations I'm finding are not falling for the trap of building an oasis in the desert and hoping that people show up. They're doing more along the lines of what I'm seeing here with the POZEN group, which is they're trying to become part of the conversation and be in harmony with that conversation.
Can I jump in as well on that? I think what we see, similar to what Daniel's saying, is that physicians, to a degree, some of them are still going to a product website, but this idea of a huge service portal designed to have all of the information across all of a company's products, really remembering that extra URL and again it not being Google searchable really just didn't work out. So what a lot of companies are looking at is a more distributed model. How do you be where physicians are? They have limited time in their day. There's a limited number of sources we know they're using. How do you provide those services and content where the physicians are going anyway?
Yeah, and I'd add one more thing to that, which is that what we're hearing back from our clients is a draw towards putting consumer-oriented content in the HCP channel. So really looking at the physician as a consumer and focusing on content that's interesting, that it's exciting, that still has the production values you would expect on the consumer side, but then applying that to physician-based information.
Great, thanks.
Great, everyone. I'm going to speak as loudly as possible. So for those in the room, I'm sorry that you hear me screaming at you, but I hope everyone on the line can hear me. The next question is a great one. It comes from Jason Napadando at Zax.com. Jason's question is, the joke is, quote, if it's on the internet, it must be true. I think physicians have a healthy skepticism when it comes to new drugs, and that's a good thing. How do you overcome this skepticism, especially when over the internet, the knee-jerk reaction may be of even more skepticism? Perhaps we'll throw that question to Daniel to kick it off. And Daniel, please speak up into the mic there.
My first exposure with the internet and patients was a 30-minute patient encounter where I had to spend the first 25 minutes explaining to a patient that it was plausible but extremely unlikely that their symptoms were scurvy. Nevertheless, they had downloaded some information and they were absolutely convinced that was causing the problem. I think my thinking has changed a lot on this, where once I thought that a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing, what I'm seeing is that the internet is acting as an important, frankly, partner for patients and physicians so that they're coming in educated, so that they understand more of what's going on before they actually start engaging the healthcare system to try and figure out their treatment.
Great. Our next question comes from Jennifer Smith Parker. Jennifer's with BioPharm Insight. Her question I'm going to target to Bonin to kick it off. Besides POZEN, what other companies do you see engaged in social media and doing it well?
In the pharmaceutical space, I guess. Okay, both. All right. You know, I think that there are a number of companies that are doing great things in the social space. Of course, I feel very confident about the work that we're doing. You know, and some of our partner companies, I think that you look at companies like Amex. But I think what's central to all of those, again, and I go back to this point that's successful, is that they have moved from it being an add-on to it actually being a part of the core strategy planning. And so I think that that's where you have to really go to find those that have been successful, or are those that are putting it at the center of their strategy. And you can look at something like what Best Buy did when they had the 12th Force. You know, that became their entire Christmas gifting, support for people looking for what gifts to buy. And it was kind of put at the center of kind of that strategy. And I think that that's where you are seeing the most successes, are those that are actually integrating it into the core of their strategy planning versus it being a tactic that's tagged on to the end.
It's a business and organizational strategy more than a communications channel strategy.
And so that's what we focus heavily on, that's what I see the successes in the industry are. How are you changing your organization? How are you changing your strategic planning? How are you working differently with your agencies to let your agencies know that this is, a core part of what your expectations are? Is your agency of record still focused on, traditional approaches only and not looking across, the board?
But again, I think if you embrace that this represents a behavioral change, a societal change, that demands that the organization itself has to change to reflect that. So you have to have organizations where it becomes part of almost the DNA of what you're doing in terms of how you're determining your strategy, that it becomes an integral part of it. I think in the pharmaceutical industry, there aren't, unfortunately, a lot of great examples of where that's taking place. There are a couple of nice initiatives that have come up. And I would, put companies like AstraZeneca and Sanofi and a few others into that belt where they're starting to put programs into this. But overall, I think the reality is that the core of those organizations, it's still it's often more an add-on as a tactic rather than part of the core strategy.
And I think the pace now, so we're talking about building real-time marketing organizations. This is something, and ultimately real-time businesses. This is something that's never been seen before. People don't really know, what that takes. And so it requires a lot of organizational experimentation to figure out what's successful too.
Although I think if you could actually look back 150 years before the industrialization of information, when you actually went and interacted with a business, it was much more of what you now see now today. So.